taking an unconventional look at stocks, property, bonds, economics, and more. This is the Total Money Management Podcast with Steve Moriarty, Tom Hill, and Jacob Senior.
All right, welcome to the week that was July 29 to August 2.
We're a threesome again.
We are.
Hello, he's back.
Mate,
Where were you?
I was gone.
We were waiting for you last week.
The beautiful.
I went into hibernation, mate.
Bottom of the Barrier Reef. Is that right, Rockhampton?
He was at the bottom of the barrier reef.
Yeah.
Well, it's the bottom bit, isn't it? Cairns is the top bit. And
No, I went up to Cairns the weekend that we filmed the podcast. So
did you?
I did.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Which was a nice weekend away. But I'm back, and I'm glad to be back with you two.
Righto. That's enough of that
Did that
bullshit.
sound
Get on
genuine?
with it.
I hope it
so
sounded
lovely.
genuine.
Righto.
Look, what we're going to be covering off today, resales rising, signs of trouble,
Dun, dun, dun.
inflation. That's a new one. Give me,
Good to see you haven't lost your sense of humour.
give me some credit and insider selling. But just starting off with the big issue, talking about tax cuts, right?
Lovely.
And looking at the data, about 50% of people reported that they plan to save their tax cuts.
Stingy bastards. They should be spending and creating
Only 50.
jobs.
Well,
That's the 50 you answered, honestly.
yeah. Let's be honest, 50% plan to, but probably won't.
Yeah, it'll probably be 85.
But in terms of stimulating the economy, right, we want people spending.
Yes, we do. So get out there and spend, everybody, because it helps the economy.
Well, I mean, let's just say 100% of these people spent their $5 they got back in their tax back. Mm-hmm. Is it really going to help the economy? We're this close. We're a bee's dick away from a recession.
Well, you got to look at the aggregate figure. So if Australia's GDP is roughly about $1.8 trillion, okay? So if I said to you the tax cuts are 180 billion, right? Well, that's 1%, right? No, Stephen, it's 10%. Okay, it's a bit early and the coffee hasn't got in yet, but anyway.
I'm just going to nod.
There's a 1 and a 0 in there somewhere. So whatever it is. But my point being, as I say every week, you say, okay, well, that's going to be 1% of GDP added, right? So you can, the idea being, if I said to you, well, like you said, well, if it's $10, it's like, well, who cares? That's nothing in the scheme of things. But if it's a big tax cut, then the argument is, okay, well, that will add 1% to GDP and that will boost growth and, multiply blah, blah, blah. So as we've been saying, well, that's all right if it's 1.8 billion, but if it only turns out to be 500 million because everyone goes, God, I'm paying down the mortgage, that's where you go, okay, well, that's not a lot. That's 0.2, right?
I mean, what I think about it is if everyone's spending their tax cuts and then the rates changed, maybe we can avoid the impending doom, but the rates stay the same. So would it balance out, or am I thinking about this the wrong way?
What do you mean the rates change?
So if the rates decrease...
So instead of paying 35 cents, you're now paying 32 or something?
Yeah.
Or you're talking about, like, the RBA.
The RBA rates.
Oh, right, okay.
So
Yeah.
If they're in tandem...
Exactly.
We should avoid a recession.
You get $65 a week extra in a tax cut.
Yeah.
The RBA raises rates by 0.25%.
Yeah.
And then your mortgage goes from 600 to 665. You just lost the tax cut.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying.
That's what we're saying. It's sort of, what do they call it? Robbing Peter to pay Paul, so to speak, right? And this is why the RBA have a little bit got the shits with the government, because the RBA is saying, listen, we're trying to pull down the economy with inflation. All governments are saying, no, because that's going to create unemployment and people are whinging and they won't vote for us. So we'll let them, we'll give them, contribution to their electricity bill or their transport bill. And the RBA says, well, hang on, if Steve used to pay $100 a week for energy, now he's paying 50 because you guys are giving him $50 subsidy. Steve's going to go and spend that other 50 and that's going to contribute to inflation. And the RBA then says, well, hang on, we're trying to get Steve not to spend money. So they're working against each other, and that's a really serious issue because the RBA, you don't vote for the governor, you vote for Albo. So Albo's going, no, give them some money to help, and the RBA's going, no, take some money off them because, we want to quell inflation. So it's a really stupid argument.
It doesn't work.
Well, generally, that's where government policy is really important, because you have to say, well, hang on, guys, you're working against each other. So what are we doing? Are we doing inflation, or are we doing unemployment and cost of living? Right? Because you can say, to be honest, it is hard, because if you say, like I whinge every bloody week about Dorito corn chips or something, which were half price this week.
Hey.
Half price. Hey, I picked up 2 for 1. And Lindt chocolates, thanks to Peter Meek out there for those chocolates. But the point being that because they're working cross purposes, we're not going anywhere.
Well, what do you think needs to happen?
Well, it's a tough call, Tom, because you see, if the cost of living is rising, then what you're doing is saying prices are really expensive, and I'm finding it hard to, the Doritos are $4, not $2, right? Now, if I complain about the Doritos being more expensive, then if you come to me and say, listen, Steve, we're going to knock those Doritos back to $2, and I go, that's exactly what I want. Listen, mate, your son won't have a job because that's the way it works, because we've got to quell demand, right? And then if you don't want the Doritos corn chips, your son's working at the Dorito factory, well, we're going to lay off your son.
Well, it's just a snowball, right? Like leases are going up, everything's going up, so how can anyone reduce prices to ease that cost of living thing? Like the situation... Like, I feel people either need to start just spending less, which is going to be bad anyway, or they need to earn more, which is, to fuel that and fund that.
Yeah, but you can't earn more if everybody's cutting back spending.
Exactly.
So
what do you even do?
Well, this is why in the 80s, the early 80s with Hawke and Keating, or the late 80s, where interest rates were at 18%. Inflation was really high, but we had rising incomes to pay for it. So even though the Doritos were $4, I was getting wage rises to say, okay, well, it's a bit of a pain in the ass, but it's still only 1% of my pay packet to buy Doritos, right? Even though the price is going up. These days, the problem we've got here is because wages are not keeping up, people are saying, well, I've still got to pay $4 for the Doritos, but I'm still only getting $1,000 a week. So the Doritos were 1% of my income. Now they're 1.5. Then you put on the chocolates, and you put on petrol, and you put on rent, and you put on the mortgage. So people are spending to maintain the same living standard. It costs you more money. So the idea the RBA is saying is we're going to raise interest rates. I'm going to go, oh God, I can't afford something, so I'm going to have to stop spending so much. Okay, I'm not going to buy any more Dorito corn chips. That generally brings demand for Doritos down. The Doritos factory says, listen, Jacob, sorry mate, we've got to give you the sack because Steve's not buying the Doritos anymore. Price of Doritos falls, and we do it all over again, right? That's the economic theory. That's why they raise interest rates, to stop demand. Right? Why do they lower interest rates? For somebody to go and borrow money. Generally, it was businesses, and expand, right? The other way you deal with inflation is saying at a producer level, right, I'm making these Dorito corn chips. Steve's not going to buy them at $4. Okay, well, what I've got to do is I've got to bring in technology that makes, instead of making 100 packets of Doritos, I'm going to get 120 packets. So the price is going to stay at $3 because I'm being more efficient with the resources. But we're not talking about that in Australia, right? And the reason why is because we hardly make anything here. That's the big problem, you see. The cars are all made overseas. So that's that. Before we were able to say, well, we can drive productivity, and the argument is, well, if I've got a ton of iron ore, instead of making 2 cars, I can now make 3.5. That's really good because we can keep the price low, right? But we don't do that anymore. So this is why we've got problem with services inflation, because services are really hard to be productive, right? Because you get a school teacher, you just can't keep shoving kids in the room. Oh, we got this year's 50. Inflation's gone up 10%. Right, we'll just stick in 55 kids. Put in another 5. And then the next year inflation's gone up 5. Right, we'll just stick in another 5 kids. You can't do that, right? Whereas with manufacturing, you can say, right, well, how do we find a better way to use iron ore, right? Oh, well, we'll mix it, or, something like that. See, what a lot of consumer companies have done is, as they've called it, shrinkflation, right? So instead of saying the Doritos are $4, they were $3, what they do is say, no, they're $3, but the packet's smaller, right? Instead of getting 400 grams, now you get 300. And you see that a lot with...
that's been going on for years in food.
Yeah. You see that a lot with chocolate, right? The Snickers or the Mars bars and stuff, where it was, in my day it was like 2.5 inches long. Now it's like 2, right? And they're just getting smaller and smaller, and they're still the same price.
Well, they've gone up. They've gone both ways.
Exactly. But you see what I mean? Like, to me, I'm still paying $2, which is what I've always paid, but I'm just getting less.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I just feel like the tide's slowly rising, right? And there's a lot of people that it's fine. It's just an inconvenience. But I'm just wondering, at what point do you get the majority of the middle class really struggling? Like, what does that look like?
It looks awful, mate. Let me tell you.
I think it relates to the next topic, which is an increase in home sales. Like, if people can't afford to pay their mortgages, and they sell off their houses to buy something smaller, or they move further away from bigger cities.
Yep.
And you end up living out in Whoop Whoop for...
It forces you to make a decision. But I think, getting back to Jacob's original point, if you quell demand, there's going to be higher unemployment. And that means somebody's not going to have a job. Or it means we're going to have a shitload of Uber drivers out there, struggling to try and get an income.
Trying to make a few extra bucks.
Absolutely. And it's look, I can tell you, mate, recessions are unpleasant, right? And this is one of my complaints. Australia hasn't had a serious recession since 1991. Right? You guys don't know what a recession really is. And I can tell you, when I was young, I was unemployed at 17. Mate, it's awful. It's absolutely miserable, right? Because you can't get a job. You've got no income. You've got no work colleagues. It's really, really debilitating. That's why governments try to avoid that stuff.
That's why you buy Bitcoin.
Next time. What's the next one?
On a more serious note.
Yeah, because Bitcoin's really serious, isn't it?
No, I'm not talking about Bitcoin. One of our neighbours from the old place we lived in a couple of weeks ago, they've just sold up and moved because one of them's a lawyer, right? And the other one's some manager somewhere, sales manager somewhere. They've had to sell their house because they can't afford to pay the mortgage because they've got another property somewhere else. And everything's
as an investment,
right? And they've just over leveraged, so they've had to sell their primary residence. They're now renting.
Yeah, but that's it, Jacob. I can tell you, it's a really common story, right? There's because this is why we teach about market cycles, right, and valuation. It's you just because the bank throws you $1 million doesn't mean you got to rush out and buy something, right? It's really, really crazy, and this is why dare I say it, we move on to Tuesday, there's record insolvencies, right? People are starting to feel the pinch from interest rates that have gone from 0.1 or 0.2, I think, to 4.35. I mean, that's a massive jump.
Yeah. There's people just need to stop. They're going to stop spending. They're going to be unable to pay their mortgages. They can't go on holidays.
Yep. Inflation's gone up.
They're going to really prioritise the things that mean the most to them, which is like their family and getting their kids into school and healthcare and that kind of stuff.
Not a $50 breakfast.
Exactly. No.
Okay.
And that's why I say it will take a while to. That's why we've been saying, well, let's have a look at September to see if people are going, yoo-hoo, $100 in the wallet, I'm going to spend it all. Like we're saying, I think most people are going to be going, right, let's just pay down that goddamn mortgage.
Yeah, whether it's your own holding on.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whether, as I say, if you have a new style of living which says, I no longer eat Dorito corn chips, if someone says, Steve, here's an extra $50 a week, there's a lot of us who'll say, okay, well, I can live life without Doritos now. I'm in a new way of living life. I'll bank the $50, right? Rather than say, oh, great, I'll go back to eating Doritos again, right? No, people get used to the new lifestyle, and if it's frugality, then it's really hard to break the back of that, right? Because the government's the only way that John Maynard Keynes, the economist, said the government's got to spend money to get people to be confident again, for people to then go and borrow money, right? Because when the economy's shrinking, no one's going, oh, I've got a really good idea. I think I'll go and borrow $1 million and buy a property. It's like, what, are you crazy? Right?
The uncertainty is what puts people off.
Well, but it's also just the level of income, Jacob, that you now find. You know, like I filled up the car yesterday. It was $100. I can tell you too.
That's cheap.
Well, yes and no, I suppose. You see, it used to cost me 70, right, to fill the car up, and I never, it was like, $70, yeah, righto, whatever. But when it went in, and at some point it was about 105, I was like, what the, WTF? What's going on here? It's $100. It was $1.40 a litre. Then it was $2.30. I drove home last night with my kids, and I went, oh, that's not bad. $1.73.
Yeah, it's amazing how your mindset changes.
Absolutely.
But that's a good point. We've just hired a new employee at work, and she's from New Zealand, and she was saying there's a massive amount of New Zealanders coming over from New Zealand to Australia.
Yep.
Because the cost of living, rent, and house prices are obnoxious.
In New Zealand. Well, they're falling too.
It's $3 something for fuel in a minute.
Yep.
And she's just like, there's no wage increases, so they're coming over to Australia to actually be paid what they're worth.
Yeah.
And she's a nurse. And she's just like, we can't afford to live over there, so we have to move country.
It's just crazy. It is.
And the same thing's happening here.
Yeah.
So where are we going to go, lads?
It's just
Thailand.
Yeah. But it is serious, because the RBA knows that interest rates are knocking the hell out of mortgage owners and landlords, right? So, look, everyone's in a tough spot, and I've been saying this for a little while, is that renters are going, oh man, this is outrageous. Like my rent's gone from $500 to $560, and it's really killing me. The landlord is going, man, this is killing me. This bloody property's gone from $700 to $840. So both the renter and the landlord, who's negatively geared, are going, this is terrible, right? And it's sort of like, okay, well, it's a bad situation, because the renter's saying, well, the landlord should suck it up, and the landlord's saying, well, I'm not paying for it, the renter's going to pay for it.
Somebody's got to pay the bank.
Yeah, but it's hard to, how does this get better? How does this not continue?
It breaks. Sorry, but it breaks.
Yeah, and that's what everyone's trying to avoid it. Well, you've got government trying to avoid it, RBA going, this needs to happen.
Yep. This is the problem with too much debt, Tom.
Yeah.
And that's why I say you've got to look at Japan as a model, right? Because the Japanese government, there's two ways to resolve once you've got too much private debt, which is what we've got in Australia, okay? There's too much private debt. It's all been poured into speculating in real estate, right? So there's two ways to deal with it. You either trash the joint in 12 months, right? Or you say, we're going to slowly deflate the balloon or the bubble, call it whatever you want, at, your house price is not going to go down 50% in 1 year. It's going to go down 5% per year for 10 years on average, right? So take your pick. That $1 million property is going to go back to 700. It can go back in 12 months, which is an all godmighty mess, or it goes back over 10 years and it's a sort of, slow, painful deflation. Americans generally go, righto, let's just, let that shit show happen, and in 12 months we start all over again, right? That's what they did with the GFC. In Japan's GFC, they said, no, let's just keep it the same.
We'll let them down gently.
Here we are 30 years later with zero growth, But so the question is, which way do you want to take it? But my point is, either way, that property's going back to 700, or,
It's not going to go anywhere for 3
Well,
years.
as we talked about, like I think you and I, Jacob, last week were talking about Nvidia, right? Well, now it's down about 25, I think, from its high or something. So do you know what I mean? Like there's someone who bought it at $100 and now looking at it at 75 going, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Right? So that's what I'm saying. At some point, it's got to go back to its sort of true value, right? And this is what happens with property markets, and New Zealand has done that, right? It's starting to retreat. And it's painful because there's a lot of investors going, hang on, I didn't sign up for this. You know, like, isn't property just supposed to go up all the time? It's like, that's not the way property works, stocks work.
Anything works. It all cycles, right?
And we haven't really seen that here for a very long time. So it's hard to even comprehend that that's a possibility.
100%. The longer it goes on, the more you see people saying it'll never stop, right? And we get that on our socials, right? Property's going to always go up. It's always a good bet, you know. Well, sorry to say, that's not the way it works. Now, can it go on for a long time? Absolutely, but it stops.
Well, it's the people that bought when they were in their 20s, 30, and they're now in their 50s, and they've never actually seen a downturn.
That's exactly right. You look, I say if you're under 55, you haven't seen a recession, right? In 1991 was the last serious recession. So let's say you're 25 before you pay attention to economics. That takes you back to, what, about 1965, right? So that means if you're born after 1965, 1970, say, you were 21 when the recession happened, right? Well, you were still out, you know, drinking and carrying on and loving life. So you don't know what a serious recession is like where, you know, we have a lot of unemployment.
And before that, you were probably in a couple of wars. So you didn't really pay attention anyway.
Yeah.
Oh, and mate, mass unemployment right now with the valuations.
Yep. Well,
Sounds-
see, you look at the thing, that's why I said, I think it was last week or the week before, don't pay attention to the unemployment figure. It's bullshit. You know, if you've got a bloke out there driving an Uber,
he's not employed,
and he's on $400 a week, and he's living with his parents, and he's as poor as buggery, and they go, yeah, but he's not unemployed. It's like, I know, but he's bloody poor.
Yeah. Or you've got underemployment, which is casuals on 5 hours a week.
Exactly, Jacob. Exactly. And that's what we've got a lot of. Right? We've got a lot of that stuff going on. And that's what they did in Japan. You see, because they said, well, hang on, if we actually let the cards fall as it should, we're going to have like 15 or 20% unemployment. Right? Well, what the Japanese said was, no, just let Jacob, you know, be a lollipop man for, $500 a week. At least he survives, right? Just while we work off all this debt. Look, I can tell you, honestly, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Man.
Any good news in this weekly update? Or
Well, on Wednesday, the consumer price index
think
went up 1%, right? The consumer price index.
Yep.
But really, inflation dropped less than 0.1%.
Yeah. Look, I think inflation's still going to be sticky. The RBA, everybody 2 years ago, I shouldn't say everybody, economists, my favourite group, 2 years ago were like, oh, it'll be all right, you know, rates will come back down, inflation will come back down, and we'll all be sweet. Well, they're wrong, right? The RBA is now saying we won't get inflation under control until the end of 2027 or 26. That's a long way away, folks.
Yeah.
Right, so although this is why I'm critical of economists who say, oh, look, it'll all be sweet, because everyone goes, oh, it'll all be sweet. I'm going to go back out and borrow money. Because, you know, these guys are experts and they said that it's going to be 2% next year. Well, they were bloody well wrong, and people have borrowed a lot of money thinking that they're going to be okay by listening to experts. Now the RBA is basically saying, listen, you're dreaming if you're thinking we're going back to 2%. And if we do, well, it's going to be an almighty recession. You know what I mean? So you look at it and go, okay, is there any alternatives? You know, because you end up with a heap of unemployed people who then can't get housing, who then can't pay the rent. So what do? Right? You end up with heaps of people on Struggle Street.
Well, Thursday's not a bad.
Thanks. You've just really you've brought me down, Steve.
I know.
We were happy before this one.
Look, I have to say, and I've said this before, I don't think we should bullshit to people and go, oh, look, it'll all be okay.
No.
Right? Because that's not giving people the real ability to say, okay, well, listen, I need to have a think about what I'm going to do here.
Yeah.
Right? If we just go, oh, look, don't worry about it, mate, it'll be fine.
Works out
and
in the wash.
Well, this is why I'm saying when people, write on our socials and go, oh, the government won't let it fall. Really? Now tell me how they're going to do that. Right? What, Albo's going to ring everybody and go, mate, don't sell your property. It's like, Albo, I need another 500 a week. Oh, well, that's disappointing, but don't sell your property. Well, that's clearly bullshit. They can't do that. If governments could solve the problem, they wouldn't, you wouldn't have had Ireland, you wouldn't have had Japan, you wouldn't have had Spain, you wouldn't have had the GFC because they would have, quote, solved it. Right? It's ridiculous. But that's the mentality you get. Stocks won't fall. Oh, right, at a cape of 35. Yeah, but nah, this time's different, it'll be fine. It's like, okay, best of luck.
Yeah, I mean, we've said it, and you've said it time and time again, what's unique about Australia. And people tend to make stories up and have their own vision
population,
of why
right,
immigration, all this kind of stuff, why Australia's unique. Olympics, you can't build on certain parts of the land, all that kind of stuff. You can make 10,000 different versions of why Australia is unique. At the end of the day, we're seeing it play out in front of our eyes.
Yep.
The data's there as to what is going to project the future, really.
The valuation is the key, right? And that's why I say, as the bubble grows, you get all sorts of stories, right? Which is what we talked about in the latest newsletter, trying to say to people, look, what's this one? This one's artificial intelligence. When I started investing, it was the internet, right? And before me, it was the Nifty 50. And before that, it was the Great Depression. It was, we've discovered a new way of doing economics, right? You see this every goddamn time. I'm just old enough to say, hey, hang on, you guys, I remember this in 2000, right? And it's the same thing with property, right? You've got, it's population growth. Well, we've had population growth before where property prices hasn't gone crazy, right? It's low interest rates. Well, we've had low interest rates before where it hasn't gone up like that, right? So what I'm saying is when you knock out those reasons, you say, well, hang on, what's going on? I'll tell you what's going on. We're borrowing a shit ton of money, right? That's what people are doing. Now, in aggregate, it doesn't work. You might buy and sell, and we get this a bit on the socials, which is, people sort of saying, oh, well, if you bought here or if you did this or you did that, I don't have any argument with that, right? But that's about the individual. It's not about the group, right? And that's why I say there are winners and losers. Someone bought NVIDIA at $100 and it's fallen 25%. Now, the guy who bought it at 60 is going, who cares? I'm still up 45%. Yeah, but what about the guy who bought it at 100?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Well, some good news here is that private sector credit's beating expectations. Just to give people a bit of
Just keep borrowing, folks, for God's sake. Somebody just keep borrowing.
No, actually, probably before we move on, we've obviously, we've just spoken pretty heavily about, again, the lens we take is probability and, we look at past, what's happened in the past to try and make informed decisions about what's to come.
Yep.
So for those listening, what's the smart play? Obviously, it makes no sense to go into panic mode and start stressing about things we don't know. But is it a good idea now to start really auditing where our expenses are, pay down the debt that we can while things are manageable? Or what's the play?
You have to look at the scenarios, and let me use stocks, righto, a market cycle. So you imagine it's 1982, right? You buy stocks and they start going gangbusters, right? You got no idea that this thing called CAPE ratio is at 5. I'm 61, right? So in 1982, I'm 19 years of age. Right? So just imagine if I've got a job and I think, I'm going to buy some stocks. So I just start buying some stocks, right? they start rising. Oh, Jesus, this is a good lurk. I'll just put some more money into stock. These things are fantastic, right? Now, it comes to 2000, your money's compounded at 16% per annum for 18 years, right? You've made 4 times your money. Now, at that point, it's pretty hard for an inexperienced investor in any asset class to say, listen, I've had a bloody good run here, I need to have a look at this. Or to say, oh, I wonder if this happens every time, right? And that's why we talk about market cycles, because what you do is say, I bought a property for 500, it's now worth 900. I've had it for, 8 years or something. I can't possibly see how it could go back to 600, right? You have to take a look at it now and say, buying it at 500 was completely different to the now situation at 900, right? And so that's where you have to do an audit, right? And say, okay, I've had a great run in stocks, I'm going to sell some. And that's why we talk about rebalancing, right? The problem with property is you can't rebalance a part of a property. You've got to sell the whole gig, right? And that's a major, major difference, because in stocks you can at least say, I bought $10,000 worth, it's now worth 15, I'm going to sell 5 or I'm going to sell 10. With a property, you can't say, look, I bought it for 500, it's now worth 800, I'm going to cash in the 500. Well, you can't do that. You've got to sell the whole property, right? But my argument would be it's time to be cautious and check your own position. And if if you owe 200 and the property's worth $1 million, don't worry about it. You're fine, right? But you might check it and say, yeah, but my industry's, I'm going to suffer a downturn, or, I might lose my job. Okay, well, you've got to make some decisions. And they're not easy. They're tough to make, right? But you've got to look at it and say, if I've got debt, how well am I covered?
Yeah. For me, it's don't be silly and leverage up to the 9s over the next few years. Like if you're looking at your position and going, instead of buying another 2 or 3 investment properties, I'd be looking at other investment classes that are a little bit more easy to get in and out of, a little bit more liquid.
Yep.
And that don't require an incredible amount of debt. And that could be stocks, it could be, I don't know, artwork, it could be anything.
But it's hard, Jacob, when everybody's making money in an asset class.
I'm saying if for me, knowing what I know, that's what I'd be looking at.
Yeah. There's a lot of people out there who have gone, you just get into the property market, right? If you just get in, you'll be fine. And it's like, no, that's not the way it works, right? You needed to get in 2000, right? And if you missed that boat, I'm not saying you missed the boat forever, but what I'm saying is you've got to look at the valuations and understand the return. I can get 5.5% in a term deposit. So if I want to buy a property, I want to get at least 8.5. The yields are around 2. Now, okay, I might buy it and flog it for an extra 300,000 in 2 years. No worries. But boy, oh boy, if I get it at the top like Nvidia and it goes south, I'm in real trouble. And that's the problem. Somebody's got to hold that property or that stock at that price.
Yeah.
Right? And that's why I'm saying in aggregate, it doesn't work like that. So you as an individual have got to say, okay, I need to look at my own position and, yeah, I know they're all drunk, but I need to really sober up here.
It's a big game of hot potato, right?
Well, Tom, yeah, it is. And to be quite honest, it is. But the point is someone gets burnt, right?
So insider selling. So this is an interesting one, which might go more towards the Buffett moving into cash, and we could talk about that forever. Which maybe that's on next week's podcast.
Yeah, it is.
Buffett.
Yep.
But there's been an increase in insiders, quote unquote, selling back into cash and selling their positions down.
Yep.
And that, I think that in a nutshell just goes to what we've been talking about for 34 minutes, which is this. There's a bad smell.
Smart ones are rebalancing, maybe.
Yeah.
What do they know? Yeah. So I think this article that you showed, Steve, corporations are dumping stock at the fastest rate in over a decade.
Yeah.
And I know in next week we'll be talking a bit about Mr. Buffett and some of the moves he's made recently.
He holds more treasury bonds now than
the Fed.
Do, yeah.
Really? Yeah. But it's
and a lot of cash.
Yeah.
He's a wise old bastard, mate. He's 93, he's seen a lot of cycles, and he's got the biggest, we're going to talk about this next week in the next episode, but he's got the biggest cash pile he's ever had. That's kind of telling you something. Right?
Depends who you ask. If you ask the 21-year-old finance experts on TikTok, he's just lost his marbles. He needs to...
From his mum's basement. Anyway, what do we finish up with, lads?
Well, we got the short story, which I think just goes to everything we've been talking about anyway. A little bit of China in there, which we've been trying to avoid in this one.
Yeah,
Yep.
well,
China,
Apple sales in China are down the toilet. They've now dropped out of the top 5 smartphone makers.
Well, China are basically saying don't buy anything foreign. They're saying buy
which is what we said a few months ago, folks.
Chinese.
Hate to sound like I told you so, but that's what I look.
You have been telling us so.
And the same thing's happening in the car market.
Yeah, with the BYD and
Absolutely.
everybody's getting tariffs now.
Why would you buy an Apple phone if you're Chinese and the Chinese government are going, right? You'd be going, I think I'll just buy the Huawei phone, right? And they're patriotic. And to be quite honest, they should be. We should all be patriotic or more patriotic in sustaining that sort of stuff. Right? And that's why, again, next week we'll talk about Buffett, but it's, there's a few red flags going up with Apple losing sales in China, moving costs, moving out of China to India, Buffett selling down his big stake. You sort of look at that and go, there's a few insiders selling. Well, that's interesting. Might want to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
But that's for next week.
I'm looking forward to
it too.
Let's wrap it up, hey? Okay. Actually, something that I don't think we've mentioned on the podcast yet, but we've got the ETF for Beginners course, which is launched on the website. So if you want to check that out, totalmoneymanagement.com.au. It's free, and for anyone that's looking to get into ETFs, it'll be good for you to check that out.
100%. And if you've done it, please reach out. Like, what do you want to see in the next one? We're continuously looking to improve. We got some really good feedback last week to put a bit in there around CAPE, which we'll look to do in the future. But yeah, go check it out.
Awesome.
Let us know what you want to see.
Cheers,
Thanks,
folks.
guys.
Cheers.
Bye.
Stay up to date on our socials. Just search for Total Money Management on Instagram and TikTok. For your free investor personality assessment, go to totalmoneymanagement.com.au. And as always, remember, we don't provide financial advice.